This is Risky Women Radio, a show that connects, celebrates and champions women in risk, regulation and compliance. We're here to share the insights on the biggest issues in our industry and hear inspiring journeys from our global members. Sign up to our newsletter at riskywomen.org. I'm Kimberly Cole, your Chief Risky Woman.
Welcome to Risky Woman Radio, broadcasting live today from Hong Kong. I'm Jenny Wong, Managing Director at Protiviti, and today we will explore the complexity of the compliance landscape as part of our Protiviti 2023 Top Risk Report. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with a special guest, Debra Au. Debra is the Head of Legal Compliance and Secretariat at DBS Bank for Hong Kong, Macau, and China. Debra has had a vast and enduring compliance career for 18 years. Just to name a few of her career highlights, being the Chief Compliance Officer for Hong Kong and Macau at HSBC, where she was instrumental in guiding the bank through the DPA and skilled person review. Debra's compliance knowledge and experience was further developed from her time at Goldman Sachs and SocGen. Debra, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny, for having me.
We would love to hear in your words about your story and your career journey. Debra, what is the biggest risk that you've taken in your career and has it paid off?
Yeah, the biggest risk I've taken in my career is the switch from my career in SocGen as a pure compliance. And then when I stepped into HSBC, I actually getting myself into the frontline role, into the COO office.
And I'm sure during that big switch and along the way, you've had obviously mentors and people who's inspired you. So we would be really interested to know, Debra, throughout that journey, who's inspired you the most?
I think it's my mentor, my life mentor, really. Someone, my previous bosses, Eileen Flaherty, who actually inspired me the most, that the career advice that she gave me, and also my other mentor called Gary DeWall, who is very quite distinguished New York lawyers. Both are lawyers in U.S., one in Chicago and one in New York. And their combined career advice for me is don't limit yourself and take control of your own path. So that is one of the reasons why I would love, being in legal compliance or risk as the support function or control function, previously being seen as cost center. I really want to understand the vast majority, why we always being, boxing into the boxes as a control person where we don't know the business. So that is one of the reasons why I put myself above my comfort zone.
Yep.
And jump into a bank, which is, having the precedent case as DPA, and then really rolling off my sleeve to try to understand what exactly is the problem in the business and how to help to provide inputs to contribute to the bank and settle the crisis or challenges where the bank and the financial industry is first and foremost facing.
That is some really good career advice. So diving in more into our topic today, Debra, what do you think are some of the biggest regulatory compliance challenges facing the Asia-Pacific financial institutions?
I really think, with the recent years of geopolitical uncertainty and the business, evolving so fast, if you look into the market, if you're close to the business, you see Bloomberg every day is changing the chart, and the walls, unexpected. I do think the biggest regulatory compliance challenges for APAC is the diversified, jurisdiction with diversified regulatory requirement and landscape that the financial institution needs to comply with.
Yes, and I think that, that's definitely one of the top consideration for a lot of the institutions nowadays. Moving on, I'd like to also get your thought, Debra. How do you see the compliance function changing to adapting to the technological paces such as digital growth, entry into new markets, and also customers needing faster, easier, and more efficient interaction with their financial institutions? And what are some of the consequences, would you say, of not keeping up with that pace with the business?
Well, I do think, given the world is changing, right? We're not now using, really new ways of working like we now having the interview online, which is not, usually did 10 or 15 years ago, which, I don't want to quote how long I've been in the industry, my age now. So I do really want to highlight is I can see that in the next, 5 or whatever, very quick near future, we don't use PowerPoint presentations in our governance forum, for example, with the use of AI, technology, RegTech, and FinTech. We may have some real-time data, and then we can just use dashboard real-time, click in the button. Compliance can do a real-time check and challenge to the business, to the front line. And then we hold up a bit of our second line of defense roles, stewardship, to adhere to our roles as a second line of defense. So if we don't keep up the pace and we're not moving up enough too close to the business, and the consequence is that the business and us were losing the touch. We will not be seen as the strategic business partner. So some of the quick evolving landscape, like I want to use some sort of metaphor, is that recently I just finished my vacation from Greenland, and I passed through a couple of days in Iceland. In October, I'm still able to drive and walk in the city of Reykjavik in Iceland. Who else can guess in November? The whole city have to evacuate. Blue Lagoon with no tourists, while a month ago it still flourished with tourism, and a lot of people walking around everywhere. And myself is actually enjoying the city with the prosperity in Iceland. And today you can see with almost 20,000 earthquakes a day, and the whole city evacuate, and the earthquake erode. Everyone is like an empty dead city now. So I think the agility is key, and then keeping up the pace with what's happening and then close to the business is very important. Otherwise, how can, Iceland been able to interpret the earthquake is coming and then give them the warning signs to evacuate people from the city to the safe place? I think same metaphors applies.
I really like that analogy. I think that's just the emphasis to your point is just how quickly can we adapt, and the agility is really key for us to keep up with the business. So Debra, looking ahead, I mean, you've already touched on it a little bit. What do you think, or how do you foresee the compliance function forming in the next 5 to 10 years? How is that going to differ from today? And, you've already mentioned earlier AI. What role will AI play? And what will be the keys to success for us?
So I think the cornerstone really is to, in the next 5 years for compliance function, is to maintain the private public partnership, which is, to work with the regulators together, because technology is evolving, every day. Who can imagine AI, then Gen AI, and so forth, we're using today, right? I don't want to use the word ChatGPT because in Asia it's diversified. It's generative AI, and now what role AI can play or will play? I think it will be a majority of roles that help us do our work much more efficient, effective, and the human touch still wouldn't be able to completely supersede, because the essence or the crux of compliance function is to give and provide quality and strategic advice, being the trust and value strategic partners to the business. And that I don't think AI or generative AI will be able to master it. So as long as a good compliance officer keep up the pace with business, strategic partnership, and then also externally, with the other hand, is public-private partnership as the cornerstone, maintain a good balance act, and keep up ourselves with mastering the use and know-how of AI and generative AI can help to do our work much more efficient, effective. The next 5 and 10 years, I can only see risk compliance, second line of defense function will be even much more a key impactful role for the financial institutions, because we are helping them to grow business safely and then to secure their success.
So it sounds like compliance will continue to play a very key role partnering to the business while utilizing AI to increase the efficiency. So it sounds like hopefully I'll be able to keep my job in the near future. Debra, you've also mentioned this a little bit already, but our friends at the regulator, what are some of the keys to maintaining a good relationship with them, especially in the current changing dynamic environment that we're operating in?
I think fundamental is really the partnership and the trust that we need to build, work together in collaboration and in a collaborative way with the regulator together on the key priorities where we all want the community, the industry to move forward to a better place, to the better, success, and keep on this agenda, in a transparent and collaborative way in partnership. I think that's kind of the cornerstone to maintain good relationship with the regulators.
Sounds like you've got the recipe sorted out there, maintaining the good relationship with our regulators and with the business.
This episode is brought to you by Protiviti. Protiviti is a global consulting firm with deep expertise in transformation, risk management, and compliance. Partner with Protiviti and face the future with confidence.
Debra, I'm now going to move on, and I'm going to have to put you on the spot a little bit. I'd like to know, in one word, from your opinion, what's the most important trait that a CCO, a Chief Compliance Officer, should have?
Okay, I think if you asked me this question a couple of years ago, it will be very different from now. I think a couple of years ago, or, if you are having your career in compliance for long, you think technicality for compliance, to know how of the regulations, being able to know the rules, regulation inside out, may be the most trials. But now I would say it is not, to me, the most important. I think know-how is the basic, but strategic and thought leadership is the future that a CCO must have, because we need to look ahead, keep pace with the business, partnering with the regulator, being forefront and having the forward-looking view, not being reactive, but more proactive. Compliance is really the important trait of a CCO that today, if you are the CCO, is a must to have.
Sounds like an ever-changing function, compliance in the next few years. I just have to give you guys a world of credit to be able to function in this environment. Debra, so looking into the year ahead, what is going to be your top priority?
I think my top priority is to keep on upskilling and reskilling people, changing the old school compliance, allow me to use the word, the mindset, with, from a reactive compliance mindset to much more a proactive mode, because previously we always used the word reactive perform. Now I would say compliance have to proactive prevent and preempt, because we cannot get ourselves back into the loop. If you see the history of each financial institution that move from crisis or some legacy history, there is no longer, the luxury to be reactive and then we perform. We need to be proactive to prevent and protect.
Sounds like you just need to be 10 steps ahead every time. So that's definitely going to be an interesting journey for all of us. And Debra, as a final question, what is the one book that you would recommend to all the upcoming leaders within the risk and compliance space?
So there is a book that I really want to introduce to everyone, which is the book called from Harvard Business School, is Stop Worrying on What Other People Think. So I think later on I will share the whole book name, and it's a recent published book under Harvard Business Review. And it talks about the idea of FOPO theory, is fear of people's opinion. I think compliance, and especially for female, if you are in the risk and compliance areas and you are one of the female leaders in the chair, we tend to be very humble because we're female. And for new leaders, we try to always observe what other old folks think. But because of that, we tend to think too much. And we limit our potential and try to let the Asian brain or others to take control of what we really think. So sometimes we may, hold on a bit because as a risk and compliance, we may want to observe and a little bit conservative. But now with the evolving, changing landscape, I do think the need to start taking back the control of ourselves in order to be comfortable and able to speak up is very important. And recently I learned from my one of my manager. He did say something which also inspired me quite a bit. So he gave me a feedback and say, Debra, I think you are a driven and aggressive person. And, my immediate reaction when I heard the word aggressive, and I found that, why do you use the word aggressive? And he said, what's wrong with that? We need female on the table who are senior leaders to be a bit aggressive. But in my mind, the Asian brain, I equally, think aggressive equals sign to stereotype. So flip side of the coin, why it has to be stereotype? So I think there is always two sides of the coin. And I think this book will help a lot. And I highly recommend.
I really like that last point, and the example you gave about the aggressive. I can certainly relate to that, and that resonates a lot to me as well. Just as a senior female leader, walking into some of these conference rooms nowadays, it's like, well, what is wrong with coming across as aggressive? So. Thank you so much for your time, Debra, today. You've certainly inspired me a lot. I'll definitely go and look into purchasing that book and hopefully get even more inspiration from that book. So once again, thank you so much for your time, Debra, today. Really enjoyed our discussion and all the best in the future.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And thank you, Protiviti and Risky Woman for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Risky Women Radio. Be part of the ongoing conversation and learn more about our events and other programs at riskywomen.org.